Hi everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about how gamers are consuming content. Thanks to you, Keith, for giving me the opportunity to be in front of you today and talk about this. Firstly, a quick of who we are. So Cousin MG only launched last month. We're a full-service media agency focused on the entertainment sector. My name's Tom Wallace. Some of you may have come across me or met me before in my former role as director at Target Media, where I headed up the games division. We obviously specialise in kind of launching and working with entertainment sort of categories, predominantly in gaming, but also across film distribution. A large percentage of our work, which is why I'm talking about content consumption today, it's based on audience segmentation and targeting and understanding who our consumers are and helping shape sort of advertising campaigns and targeting at certain products. So today's presentation, I've kind of broken down into four parts, and hopefully they will merge seamlessly into one another. But really, firstly, I wanted to give a bit of context with the evolution of the kind of entertainment as a category, and that's across film, music, and games, and how that is shaping consumer behaviours. Because as the industry changes, the consumers change with it. And then I want to follow this on by looking at kind of traditional definitions of a gamer and whether those traditional preconceptions still exist. If they do, then why? And also how, does the gamer sort of audience, I guess, change or differ from that of music and film? Then I'm going to look very quickly at how their consumption habits have been affected by COVID-19 and the current pandemic, and also what I see evolving sort of post-pandemic and which habits may be here to stay sort of once this period finishes. I'm going to jump into just a bit of the evolution of the sector as a whole. Projected growth by PwC is around 4.3% in 2020. Now this was pre-pandemic figures, so they're obviously shifting around all the time. But what's interesting is the macro level and sort of expectations that come with this growth. Now there's going to be a key focus on the Asian and Indian market growth. AR and VR, which is already very prevalent within the gaming sector, but we'll see expansion into other sectors of entertainment, whether it's going to be addressable television or film or music. And this has already started, but they see more growth over the next 2 to 3 years. What's interesting, I guess, from my perspective, owning an ad agency, is that by 2023, ad spend and 50%, I think, is conservative in terms of estimations by that point, of marketing spend would be digital. Without wanting to throw any sort of spoilers out there for the end of the presentation, but digital has seen a big increase, an accelerated increase in consumption and spend over this sort of isolated period. But I think that was a trend that was going to be happening anyway, sort of with or without pandemic. And also the advent of kind of 5G, mobile will mean that content will be accessible faster than ever before, and that will see a big shift. Even though there has been a shift already to mobile devices, but an even larger shift to more mobile-based activations. I'm sure anyone who's worked on kind of advertising campaigns on self-serve platforms or with endemic kind of entertainment category websites, you'll see that a lot of their traffic is mobile-based already. And that's largely, because of the kind of consumers that we're talking to. What underpins all these kind of areas that are affecting growth is digital revenue. Now, most entertainment businesses are looking towards digital revenue models for the future, and this comes with an expectation to deliver for the consumer curated content that is personalized for them on an individual level. There's an expectation for the business to have enhanced data and be able to understand more granularly than ever before who their consumer is and what their habits are. The consumer and the business would expect an immediate connection with their customers and instant gratification, if you like. And also surrounding kind of all these elements is obviously, from an individual level, increased awareness of people's digital footprints online and their own data privacy, but also from businesses, the legalities surrounding individual data privacy and how they navigate those, but still be effective in a kind of advertising and targeting capacity. The UK market is hugely important to this change. I'm not going to run through each of these points, but the UK advertising market certainly has a reputation for being very forward-thinking, being very innovative, digital first, and the items you can see here, from VR to broadband infrastructure to addressable or OTT television, which is effectively catch-up television, esports, cinema. All these areas the UK excels in and is either market leader or certainly in the top 3 in Europe. And it is hugely important for this change. So by looking at the UK market as a whole, we can start to understand, how the gamer and the games consumer across multiple markets potentially will change. And so as a kind of, summary, these are sort of clear things that are happening, and the evolution of an entertainment consumer. There is a high awareness of kind of commercial activity. And ad blocking is higher than ever before, and people are more aware of their data and privacy. The pioneers of sort of content and content platforms, they chase creativity and shareable content, and are generally can be platform agnostic in that respect, and also the expectation that they can have content whenever they want it on any device that they own, which is obviously a huge challenge for businesses. So just to obviously put in a bit of context, that the evolution of the entertainment market does have an effect on those people that are consuming that entertainment. And the question is asked, are gamers different to other sort of entertainment categories? And I think as gaming has grown and has become more established as an entertainment property, when you consider it's relatively young compared to the other two types of entertainment media, then it's interesting to see, how are gamers different. There are a number of kind of predefined sort of definitions of a gamer that have been pretty consistent over the last few years. I mean, I've been working in sort of planning and advertising planning for the last 12 years, and certainly in the advent of kind of digital media and social media especially. We do a lot of profile and analysis, and I certainly don't want to sit here and tell you this is a gamer, because every type of device, every type of game genre has a slightly different demographic, and a lot of the planning that we do is based around interest rather than actual demographic profiling of age and gender. But for the purposes of today's presentation, what we've looked at is kind of preconceptions that generally resonate. And if you look across, and we have access to a number of these tools, of Facebook Business Manager or YouGov, Kantar, Global Web Index. If you take gaming as a whole, and that's as a whole category, then there is a slight skew towards male, and it does shift towards a younger age bracket. They are heavy consumers of digital media and especially social media. And the other interesting factor is that if they over-index in playing games or buying games, then generally they over-index in other forms of entertainment. So they don't exclusively sit within a gaming kind of section. They are heavily into their tech, their theatre, their cinema and their music. I wanted to also touch on the importance of life stage. Now, gaming is a bit different to other forms of entertainment because of the modern timeline attached to its development. I've kind of overlaid, the hardware launches or various hardware launches we've had over the last sort of 40, 50 years with a kind of generational propensity. And the reason I've done this is because life stage is quite an important element to consider when it comes to planning, and often affects the kind of ages and the types of people that we are targeting with advertising. But what it has meant is that you've got a relatively young kind of lifespan for gaming, and it becomes easier to look at kind of generational exposure to gaming compared to, say, film and music, which has been around for a lot longer. And what we then start doing is sort of alongside kind of life stage elements, we look at who's purchasing games, and consistently, this resonates with younger audiences. So, the 16 to 44 is always a sweet spot. for a lot of games campaigns, and I'm going to sort of build a picture as to why through the next few slides. We can see the purchasing sweet spots sit within these categories. Who are the players and who are playing these games, and we focus on the pink, the green and the red lines, which are basically more than 1 hour a day for a week. Then you can see, you know, the graph, like the line graph starts high from the 18 to 25s and 26 to 35s and then drops off. For anyone who's playing games for less than 2 hours on a weekly basis, the graph reverses. So we can see that the people buying the most amount of games, playing the most amount of games, are sitting with this younger sort of age bracket. And then if we look at actual sort of downloading, and this chart actually goes slightly younger, but we can still see that downloaders and accessors of games sit within this younger age spectrum as well. And this isn't, you know, sort of something that's relatively groundbreaking. I think all of us who work in kind of games businesses, you know this. But I think it's important to clarify how gaming does differ from other entertainment sections. And the thing is, why does it sit? Because we know there's a generation now that are growing up having, you know, played games in the 80s and the late 70s. But the fact is, and why I mentioned life stage previously, is it's incredibly important. You know, gaming compared to music and film is an incredibly immersive experience. It's harder to multitask when you're fully immersed in a video game. And within one household, sort of multiple interactive participation in games time is harder. There's obviously a huge online presence in terms of interactive participation, but in terms of interacting within one household where, you know, the game's console, the television screen resides, it's a lot harder. It's an expensive price point generally, you know, for a younger consumer, and anyone that invests more money in a product is going to then demand the time to fulfill with that product. And time is something that, you know, as your life status changes, is harder to come by. And generally speaking, the 16-25s have more time, you know, or less commitment from a work, from a family capacity to involve themselves in an immersive experience like gaming, which also happens to be constantly connected, which falls into their profiling. And their life status is very different. As soon as life status moves into cohabitation or extended family, you know, shared gaming experiences or time for gaming changes. And that's probably, you know, a presentation for another time, but looking at day part sort of game playing and game consumption by age and by life status would highlight kind of how games times during the course of a day change based on your age and your status. Another kind of interesting thing to look at is the legalities surrounding kind of gaming compared to the other entertainment sectors. Now, given the propensity of such a young tech-savvy audience, actually, video games have the lowest volume of illegal content consumption across the ENTS category, and that, you know, this could be down to the kind of size and scale of games and how you download them, and also the fact that, you know, the fact that they're hosted or they're within, you know, platforms like Steam and Sony and Xbox that have very tight restrictions. But what the knock-on effect of this means that, you know, there's a lot of young people who are purchasing games, and games can be an expensive price point, and this can lead to the consumption of additional research. So to make sure that before they commit to their purchase, they're absolutely buying the right product for them. And you can see, you know, just to kind of validate that data, you know, the effect on games downloading, the large majority comes through the official store services. Now, if you were to look at a similar chart based on film or music, you would certainly see sort of file sharing, peer-to-peer or internet activity a lot higher. But if we're looking at gamers and we're looking at, you know, content and discovery, you know, which is the purposes of the presentation, then it's important to look at the devices they use to discover content, because you can plan certainly your advertising and marketing campaigns around the devices that they're consuming content on. And what's interesting about this is literally the first 7 bars on this chart are all based around video content, and that is obviously a key element to to a young consumer, and certainly one that's relevant to the gaming category. And as you can see here, ranging from mobile to tablet to TV, it's all AV, and AV plays a hugely important. But what I wanted to look at as well is that, you know, gamers is, as I said, is quite a broad sweeping statement, and you know, I don't want to sort of under-egg the amount of work that goes on in building different audiences for different types of games and different types of devices that they play those games on. I've done a kind of a quick snapshot here of PC and mobile, which in general speaking terms, you know, PC was more deemed hardcore, mobile perhaps more casual, but it does depend on the kind of subset of game you're playing. And I've looked at an FPS audience, and you can see that actually the pattern of sort of media consumption, if you like, is pretty similar. You know, there are occasional sort of dips, but actually the pattern is the same, you know, dependent on mobile and PC device. So we can start to see that a games consumer certainly is digital first, and tends to over-index in those places. And they are generally like viewers of TV, although that has changed in the current market. And that's again a sort of probably another presentation is TV viewing, especially for young audiences. But in terms of, you know, their actual consumption habits, once we've established kind of what device they use to explore their content, so where are their sort of content gateways, which is effectively the portals that they're using to access, you know, the internet effectively, which we know is kind of central to a lot of their discovery and information. I've broken it down here by sort of generational splits, and you can see that the key here is for Gen Z and millennials, social platforms play a more important role in discovery of content than they do for older generations, who tend to have more site-specific interests and trust one source or one or multiple sources. What's also interesting is the consistency of search engine kind of content gateway behavior, and you know, this is I think will increase, you know, over the forthcoming years as Google's, you know, algorithms and search homepages become more detailed. I mean, already they contain kind of video, price, you know, and information about the game without actually having to leave the search engine. And as that information becomes more robust and more relevant and tailored to the consumer, that will probably see an increase in that section. If we then go a step further and we look at sort of channels that are used for discovery, and I've kept this relatively top line because I could have gone down a commercial route and said, right, these are the websites that they're consuming and this is the ones we're going to buy advertising on, but it changes from, you know, as I said, subset to subset. So what I thought would be interesting was look at the kind of broad sort of suite of services and content providers that young people are looking at. And I guess you can see from this chart how dominating YouTube is when it comes to both usage and sharing of content on platforms. So in answer to, I guess, my own question, which I set was, are they different to other forms of entertainment? And in many respects they're not, because within the music and entertainment and film categories there are heavy consumers of digital and pioneers in that space. I guess the difference is that within games there is a more concentrated number of people doing those things. It is a younger market, they have more time to play games and, you know, spend time researching and buying games, and it's the social currency that they use with their peers. They are heavy researchers because of the price point, and that is a differentiating factor between music and film. You know, people are more likely, I think, to take a punt on, say, a film with a cinema ticket when it's only £15 than they would with a £50-60 game. They're incredibly and becoming more savvy over their own data privacy, but also for commercial activity. You know, they're incredibly digitally savvy, and for those of you that run kind of advertising campaigns or have done so in the past, you'll know that speaking to these consumers is actually very difficult. You know, you need to be talking their language, and it's very important, especially when you're producing content around or commercial content around advertising campaigns, that it resonates with the sort of things that they understand. And finally, the consumption of social media is huge, but they tend to have kind of multiple profiles, and they use different media channels for different types of content and for different kind of personas that they may have. I mean, it's not unusual for people to have at least 2 sort of Instagram profiles, but also they're looking for creativity, and they're looking for platforms where new, innovative, creative ideas are coming from, and are quite willing to jump from one to the other. So a platform agnostic in that respect. So having explored kind of how the evolution of the industry, is affecting our consumers, and then looking a bit more closely at the consumer themselves and how they consume and what they consume, we just wanted to touch on quickly how the current pandemic is affecting those consumption habits. Actually gaming, is relatively robust in this current climate. I mean, from an advertising perspective, the out of home and cinema markets have been decimated, and the film as a category is going to have to look at, how it emerges from this situation. And a lot of the elements I talked on before about the evolution of entertainment have kind of had to be fast tracked over this current period. We've also seen a huge impact, or upweight in impacts of audio streaming and digital radio streaming, as well as television impacts. And there has been a shift to more tried and trusted kind of news outlets, as people are very conscious that it's an uncertain time, and they want sort of news and information that they can trust in this period. Gaming, as I just kind of mentioned, has been making some positive headlines in this space, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the sort of historic figures that are kind of being released by Steam in terms of concurrent users and usage in streaming services and game downloads and online. But in terms of our consumer, what are we doing more of? And really within our concentrated sort of game consumer, it's doing a lot more of the same thing, which is consumption of video content. You can see from the kind of pink bar at the bottom, which is doing a lot more of. It's really consumption of AV. Watching TV has been accelerated, which is perhaps an area that was a lot lower on the index for the kind of 16-34 consumer. But visiting social websites, video streaming, watching video on demand, all these things have seen an increased capacity. If we slide by sort of age and generation, then you can see that the pink bar is sort of 18-24s, the blue bar 25-34s. As we kind of alluded to in the last slide, they're doing a lot more of things that they do, like music streaming, online behaviours. But also it's interesting to look at some of the older generations, which is, I think, where we're going to see, their digital capacity increased. Certainly in areas like sort of web calls, but also potentially in gaming and being more savvy to streaming services and subscription-based platforms that perhaps they weren't used to in the past. Interestingly, the social media landscape has also been affected, and this is based on market share shown through April. But what we can see is a sort of platform that like Twitter, which specialises in kind of real-time and up-to-date sort of news. Whether or not it is a trusted platform, that depends, I guess, on who you follow. But certainly it's been very, very impactful in the last sort of couple of months in terms of understanding and finding out about news globally from many different sources. And so it's really interesting to see how its capacity has increased over the last month or so. And finally, what do we think is, from this period, and as we're starting to emerge from it, which elements do we think and do we hope are going to stay with us, in terms of habits post-pandemic? And what we have seen is creativity across entertainment channels has been increased. People have been forced to be innovative and creative based on the restrictions that have been applied through lockdown. And I think that will be prioritised. Platforms will always try and be more and more creative, and people will be chasing creative content. I would like to think as well that this has given a lot of people the opportunity to discover or rediscover things they love, and I think gaming certainly falls into that category. And I think based on how businesses start sort of putting people back into into the day-to-day work will affect obviously what they can and can't do in terms of discovery of hobbies. But I certainly think that will stay with us, based on the fact that potentially we are going to be moving into a kind of recessionary period over the next 12 months. I think escapism and is incredibly important, and obviously the entertainment category plays a huge role in that, and the knock-on effect is my final point, which is the kind of people's mental health. And I think there'll be a more fuller understanding of individuals' own personal mental well-being, as well as other people's. Me finished. There was a few final points that I just wanted to kind of wrap up with, which was, first of all, the shift to digital revenue models is going to dramatically and is affecting how we talk to consumers, and that has been enhanced and accelerated over the last few months. Games is, as we know, incredibly sort of prevalent throughout today's entertainment consumption. However, the usage and purchasing habits are still dominated by a younger consumer, which should definitely be sort of kept in mind when you're shaping business and marketing objectives. The current pandemic has seen a huge increase in video consumption across all age demographics, but we'll also see an upskilling from older generations in the digital kind of sphere. Consumers, again, as they've been forced into more digital platforms for content consumption, will become more increasingly expert at managing their own footprints online, and businesses should understand that how they target them and what legalities they need to use to do so. And finally, consumers will continue to chase the platforms that provide the most amount of shareable and content and creative content, and will remain relatively agnostic in doing so. And that's everything from me. So I appreciate it's a pretty broad subject, and to cover in sort of 20+ minutes. So if anyone has any questions or would like to drop me a line, then here are my contact details. But thank you for listening.